I always have felt that I was lucky because if I had been successful that early, I have a deep sentimental attachment to Carol, a long relationship about her family and also what she knew about me.
There was a time when Jack Nicholson was the definition of life in Hollywood, a man who could step into any frame and make it explode. That crooked smile, those half-crazy, half-intelligent eyes, and that deep, ironic voice, together, they created a phenomenon no one could ever replicate. From Randall McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the rebel who dared to defy the system, to Jack Torrance in The Shining, the father consumed by madness in the haunted halls of the Overlook Hotel, to the Joker in Batman, the embodiment of chaos and power. Jack Nicholson didn't just act. He existed in every role like a blade, cutting straight into the audience's heart. But even the brightest light eventually fades. At 85, the man who once ruled every stage, who held 3 Oscars and was revered by all of Hollywood, now lives in seclusion behind the iron gates of his Beverly Hills mansion. Gone are the roaring laughs, the legendary sunglasses in the front row at the Oscars. All that remains are rare photos. An old man with silver hair, sitting quietly on his balcony, staring out over the city he once made shine. Rumors of dementia have spread as swiftly as the fame that once elevated him. Friends say Jack seldom goes out, rarely entertains visitors, and mostly talks only with a few close ones, including his son, Ray. But is it simply old age catching up with him, or the deliberate retreat of a man who has seen too much and grown weary of being seen? For a legend like Jack Nicholson, every mystery becomes irresistible. He's a man who lived as if there were no tomorrow, loving wildly, acting fearlessly, and daring to step into the dark corners most actors wouldn't even glance at. Perhaps that's why he remains the last true emblem of an era of Hollywood that no longer exists. A time when art, desire, madness, and loneliness intertwined into one. So what really happened to Jack Nicholson? What made the man who once ruled the silver screen choose silence in his final years? If you've ever loved Jack Nicholson, stay until the end, to look back not only on his glorious career, but on the man behind the smile that haunted the world. Before he became Hollywood's greatest madman, Jack Nicholson was just an ordinary boy from Neptune, New Jersey, a place where the light of art seemed to have never reached. He was born on April 22, 1937, into a family whose very foundation was built on a secret, a lie that would remain hidden for decades. Jack's biological mother, June Frances Nicholson, was only 18 at the time, a young dancer working with small traveling shows. When she became pregnant, she was unmarried and faced the harsh stigma of 1930s America, where a young woman having a child out of wedlock was practically exiled from society. To protect June's reputation and her future, her parents, John and Ethel Mae Nicholson, made a life-changing decision. They would raise the baby as their own and pretend June was his older sister. And so, for more than 30 years, Jack Nicholson lived without knowing who he really was. He grew up in the warm affection of his parents, who were, in truth, his grandparents, in a modest home in Neptune. Ethel Mae, the woman Jack believed to be his mother, worked as a hairdresser. John, the man he called father, was a simple craftsman. Together, they raised Jack in a disciplined but loving household, practical, modest, and filled with care. June, the woman Jack thought was his sister, visited often, always kind and unusually attentive. Yet no one ever explained why this sister seemed to care so deeply for the boy, or why Jack felt such a strong, inexplicable bond with her. The secret was guarded so tightly that even close relatives stayed silent. It wasn't until 1974. By then, Jack was already a Hollywood star thanks to Chinatown and multiple Oscar nominations, that Time magazine published an investigative article revealing the truth. That was the moment when the whole world learned, and Jack himself learned, that his sister, June, was, in fact, his mother, and the couple he'd called his parents were actually his grandparents. The revelation shocked everyone. But what impressed the world most was Jack Nicholson's reaction. No rage, no breakdown. He simply said quietly, "It's a hell of a revelation, but it's not something to be broken by. I'm impressed by how they protected me all the way." Jack chose to face it with calm acceptance. He never sought out his biological father, whose identity remains a mystery to this day. And he never blamed his mother. Perhaps deep down, he understood that the women in his family had done what they believed was right, in an era that left no mercy for mistakes. His childhood lacked no affection, but it did lack something deeper, a sense of belonging. Jack was a bright, imaginative boy, drawn to movies and adventure stories. He would later say he was born to stand under the lights. Though at the time, no one could have imagined that this boy would one day become one of cinema's most enduring icons. At 17, Jack left his hometown and headed for Los Angeles, officially to visit his sister June. But in truth, it was the beginning of his search for identity. He took a job as an office clerk at MGM's animation department, where legends William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were creating Tom and Jerry and Yogi Bear. It was there that Jack learned one of the most important lessons of his life. To tell a story, you must first understand human emotion. From that small Hollywood office, Jack Nicholson began to write the story of his own life. No one knew that behind the charming smile of that young man was a heart long hidden behind lies. And it was precisely that hidden truth that gave his performances their haunting depth. It was the quiet foundation that shaped one of the greatest legends in American cinema. By day, Jack was still the diligent office clerk at the animation studio, taking notes, brewing coffee, running errands between departments. But when night fell, he would shed his office clothes and step into the tiny acting classrooms of Los Angeles, where the nameless dreamers gathered to learn how to turn emotion into art. There, Jack was no longer the quiet clerk. He watched, listened, and then burst out like fire, raw, instinctive, uncontrollable. Fellow students called him the crazy guy with strange energy. Jack only laughed. If I can't be believed as crazy, how can I make the audience believe I'm alive? In 1958, his first opportunity arrived, The Cry Baby Killer, a low-budget film about a lost young man. The movie flopped completely. No one remembered it except Nicholson himself. But to him, it was a beginning. The first time he saw his name on screen, and the first moment he felt that, even if no one noticed, he belonged here. Throughout the 1960s, Jack Nicholson lived like a drifter in the world of B-movies. He frequently collaborated with Roger Corman, the king of cheap cinema, famous for making films with just a few $1,000s and a rented warehouse. Under Corman, Jack tried everything, acting as a criminal, a cowboy, a killer, writing screenplays, The Trip, even directing, Drive, he said. There was no glamour, no money, only endless shooting days under the heat and long nights writing scripts in a shabby, rented room. But in that seemingly insignificant environment, he learned everything. The rhythm of a scene, the power of light, the breath of the camera, and, most importantly, how to bring a character to life through his own heartbeat. During those years, Jack Nicholson wasn't famous. He wasn't handsome in a conventional way, didn't look like a leading man, and major studios paid him little attention. But he was different. He enjoyed challenging norms, choosing roles that were odd, conflicted, even ugly, the kind other actors avoided. He wasn't afraid to be crazy. He believed madness was the only thing that made an artist real. "I don't want other actors to envy my roles," he once said. "I want them to fear them." No one knew that amid those B-movies and repeated failures, a legend was being forged in fire. Jack Nicholson was quietly preparing for the explosion that would make Hollywood remember his name forever. In 1969, fate and fortune finally knocked. Jack was offered a small role in a low-budget, hazy scripted film made by two rebellious hippies, Easy Rider. He played George Hansen, an alcoholic lawyer who joins two drifters on a cross-country motorcycle trip. No one in the crew expected much. But when Easy Rider premiered, it became a cultural earthquake that shook America. In a decade marked by the Vietnam War, anti-establishment movements, drugs, and the collapse of traditional values, Easy Rider was a mirror to a lost generation's soul. And within it, Jack Nicholson, just a supporting actor, stole the spotlight. With his disheveled hair, sardonic grin, and eyes shifting between lucidity and delirium, George Hansen became the film's spiritual core, the voice of reason and the embodiment of wild freedom that generation longed for. He needed no grand speeches. Nicholson held the audience's gaze effortlessly. He could shift from drunken laughter to aching melancholy in a single breath. In one iconic campfire scene, when his character says, "This used to be a hell of a good country. I can't understand what went wrong," it no longer felt like dialogue. It felt like the voice of an America that had lost its way. That performance earned Jack Nicholson his first Oscar nomination and flung open the gates to greatness. From a wanderer in B-movie backlots, he became the symbol of rebellion, a new face for a generation of artists unafraid to break every rule. Then came the 1970s, the golden age of American cinema, when directors and actors finally stopped fearing what was too different. Nicholson became one of the defining figures of that era, when art and freedom intertwined in a wild, melancholic symphony. In 1970, he starred in 5 easy pieces, now regarded as one of the masterpieces of America's anti-establishment generation. His portrayal of Bobby Dupea, a former piano prodigy turned drifter, revealed his full emotional range: sorrow, rebellion, and loneliness. The scene where he argues with a waitress over a simple chicken salad sandwich on toast, trivial on paper, became legendary, cited in acting schools as a perfect example of naturalistic, defiant performance. The role earned Nicholson his first Best Actor nomination. He followed it with a string of bold choices. Carnal Knowledge, 1971, directed by Mike Nichols, provoked outrage for its raw portrayal of sexuality, yet Nicholson was praised for embodying an arrogant, emotionally hollow man of the so-called liberated era. In 1973, he impressed again in The Last Detail, playing Petty Officer Billy Badusky, a foul-mouthed, rough-edged sailor with unexpected compassion. His freewheeling, tragicomic performance drew critical acclaim and another Oscar nomination. Then in 1974 came a new peak, Roman Polanski's Chinatown. As private detective Jake Giddes, sharp, stubborn, and trapped in a web of deceit, power, and corruption, Nicholson ascended to the pantheon of Hollywood's finest. Chinatown was not only a neo-noir masterpiece, but also the film that cemented Jack Nicholson as the embodiment of complex, conflicted masculinity. A flawed hero who knows he's losing yet keeps fighting anyway. In 1975, Jack Nicholson stepped into the role that would define his entire career. Randall Patrick McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It wasn't just a movie, it was a declaration for an entire generation. And McMurphy, the rebellious, sharp-witted man who dared to defy the system, was a mirror of Nicholson himself. To prepare for the role, he didn't just read the script. Nicholson actually lived in a psychiatric hospital, eating, sleeping, and spending time with real patients, observing every glance, every habit, every fragment of behavior. He wanted to understand not only how they acted, but how they felt the world around them. The suffocating confinement, the fear, and the desperate longing to be seen as human. That experience allowed Nicholson to create a McMurphy who was both defiant and compassionate, humorous yet tragic. A madman who wasn't truly mad, but more lucid than the world surrounding him. In the film, McMurphy is a convict who pretends to be insane to avoid hard labor, only to discover that the asylum is far more terrifying than prison. There, he clashes with Nurse Ratched, the embodiment of the invisible machinery of control. Every time McMurphy provokes laughter or sparks rebellion among the other patients, he ignites another battle between freedom and oppression, individuality and authority. Nicholson acted with his entire body. The sly smirk, the dagger-sharp gaze, and those outbursts that seemed spontaneous but were deeply calculated expressions of a character's psyche. At times, he made the audience laugh. At others, he left them in stunned silence. McMurphy wasn't a character anymore. He was a living soul on screen. When One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest premiered, it became a global phenomenon. The film not only triumphed at the box office, but was hailed as a humanist masterpiece, a rallying cry for personal freedom. At the 1976 Academy Awards, it achieved the rare Big Five sweep: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. At the center of that triumph stood Jack Nicholson. He accepted his Oscar with a grin that was half mischievous, half overwhelmed, the moment that forever sealed his place in cinematic history. From a drifter in B-movie backlots, Nicholson had become an immortal face of Hollywood, proof that the greatest art is born from those who dare to go against the tide. After Cuckoo's Nest, Nicholson entered the most powerful phase of his career. Between 1976 and 1979, he was no longer an actor seeking roles. He chose them. Hollywood was shifting rapidly, and Nicholson became the emblem of its new kind of cinema, raw, liberated, and unafraid to stare into the darkness of human nature. In 1976, he fulfilled a lifelong dream, acting alongside his idol, Marlon Brando, in The Missouri Breaks. Two titans sharing the screen made Hollywood buzz with anticipation, but reality was different. Brando, unpredictable and often forgetting his lines, relied on cue cards, while Nicholson grew frustrated with his erratic behavior. The film flopped. Yet from that failure, Nicholson learned something crucial. Even idols can crumble, and only discipline sustains greatness. In 1978, he took a creative leap with Goin' South, a comedic western that he both directed and starred in. The film wasn't a hit, but it proved that Nicholson was more than an instinctive actor. He was a sharp-minded storyteller. His dark humor, timing, and effortless charm carried the film, winning affection even if not profits. During this period, he also appeared in The Last Tycoon, 1976, the final film of legendary director Elia Kazan, based on F. Scott Fitzgerald's unfinished novel. Though his part was brief, Nicholson's presence, as always, was precise, powerful, and unforgettable. By the late 1970s, Jack Nicholson had become a living legend. He was among the rare actors for whom top directors, Stanley Kubrick, Mike Nichols, Roman Polanski, would write roles specifically. In a turbulent Hollywood, where many peers were undone by alcohol, drugs, or scandal, Nicholson stayed upright, not because he avoided chaos, but because he mastered his own. Then, in 1980, Nicholson took on one of the most disturbing roles ever filmed: Jack Torrance in The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's novel. If Cuckoo's Nest showed Nicholson as a rebellious and compassionate soul, The Shining revealed his other face, madness perfected into art. Kubrick, a notorious perfectionist, chose Nicholson for one reason. No one can make people afraid with just his eyes the way he can. On set, Kubrick pushed Nicholson to the breaking point, demanding hundreds of takes for a single scene. But instead of collapsing, Nicholson transformed that pressure into something haunting. He embodied Torrance so fully that crew members later said, "When Jack walked in, you forgot this was a movie." Every twitch of his eyebrow, every crooked grin, every scream felt terrifyingly real. So much so that co-star Shelley Duvall suffered a nervous breakdown during filming. One night, in the middle of an intense shoot, Nicholson improvised the now legendary line, "Here's Johnny," inspired by The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Kubrick loved it so much he kept it in the film. With that single line and a swing of an axe through a door, Jack Nicholson carved his place in pop culture forever. The Shining was more than a horror film. It was a psychological experiment, with Nicholson as its beating, chaotic heart. He made audiences both fear and pity Torrance, a broken father, isolated, tormented between the urge to create and the collapse of his own mind. His madness wasn't just supernatural. It echoed a weary, disillusioned America at the end of the 1970s. From The Shining onward, Jack Nicholson ceased to be merely an actor. He became an emotional state of the culture itself, rebellious, reckless, yearning for freedom, yet heartbreakingly human. Every role that followed carried a shadow of Torrance, a haunted soul, terrifying and true, from whom humanity could not look away. After The Shining, Jack Nicholson entered the most radiant phase of his career, a streak of roles that cemented his image as the most dangerous man in Hollywood. Magnetic, unpredictable, and always beyond limits. In 1983, he stunned the world by shedding his trademark madness to become Garrett Breedlove, a retired astronaut in terms of endearment. The role earned Nicholson his second Oscar, this time for Best Supporting Actor. From a rebel, he transformed into the embodiment of mature charm, a seasoned, stubborn man who could make audiences weep with nothing more than a single remorseful glance. Then came 1989, when Hollywood wondered who could possibly play the Joker after decades of comic book incarnations. Jack Nicholson stepped into Batman and redefined the character forever. His Joker wasn't just insane, he was the embodiment of art and sin, hilarious yet terrifying. With a groundbreaking deal that included a percentage of the film's profits and merchandising rights, Nicholson earned between $60 and $90 million, one of the most lucrative contracts in cinematic history. The 1990s saw Nicholson continue his reign with a series of unforgettable performances. A Few Good Men, 1992, gave birth to the immortal line, "You can't handle the truth," shaking movie theaters around the world. As Good as It Gets, 1997, where he portrayed an obsessive-compulsive writer, won him his third Oscar, making him one of the rare actors in history to claim 3 Academy Awards. Nicholson entered the new millennium with About Schmidt, 2002, a quiet, heartbreaking performance. Gone were the madness and the swagger. In their place stood an aging man confronting emptiness after retirement. The role proved that Nicholson could still touch hearts without ever raising his voice. He found new life again in The Departed, 2006, Martin Scorsese's crime epic, where he played mob boss Frank Costello, cold, brutal, yet still tinged with Nicholson's trademark dark humor. 2 years later, in The Bucket List, 2007, he joined Morgan Freeman to deliver laughter and tears to the world, the story of 2 dying men rediscovering the meaning of life. In 2001, Nicholson received the prestigious Stanislavski Award in Moscow, honoring his entire body of work and his unparalleled ability to inhabit a character. The man who could turn madness into art and tragedy into truth. And then, after more than half a century of conquering every peak, Jack Nicholson quietly withdrew from the spotlight with How Do You Know, 2010. There was no farewell ceremony, no grand announcement. He simply vanished from the screen, as if his final character had stepped out of the frame to live the rest of his life in silence. A glorious chapter closed, but the name Jack Nicholson still echoes, like the Joker's laugh, like McMurphy's eyes, and like the lingering voice of those cinematic souls who never truly rest. After How Do You Know, 2010, Jack Nicholson never officially announced his retirement. He simply walked off the stage in silence. But before entering his years of seclusion, there was one story that many believe defined the way he loved and lived. His only marriage to Sandra Knight, the one woman who made Hollywood's rebel believe in ordinary happiness. That story began in the early 1960s, when Jack was still an ambitious young man drifting between small studios, and Sandra Knight was a young actress with a luminous face and gentle eyes. rare qualities in the film world. They met on the set of The Terror, 1962, a B-horror film produced by Roger Corman. During the long, grueling shoot, surrounded by mist and the smell of smoke machines, two lonely souls found each other. Sandra later recalled, "Jack was different then. He wasn't famous yet, but there was something fierce in his eyes, as if he was always looking further than everyone else in the room." Love came quickly and passionately. Both were young, idealistic, and believed that passion could overcome everything. They married that same year, a small ceremony in California, no press, no glamour. At the time, Nicholson was still struggling to break into the industry, chasing his first real role. Sandra became his confidant, his sounding board, the one who saw the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. A year later, their daughter Jennifer was born in 1963. Jack later said, "It was the first time I ever felt like I truly mattered to someone." But the years that followed were far from a fairy tale. Nicholson's career was still uncertain, and Sandra gave up her own acting work to care for their child in a small Los Angeles apartment. Money was tight, schedules chaotic, and Jack's fiery temperament made things harder. He often left home early to write or shoot for Roger Corman, returning only after Sandra and their baby were asleep. "He talked about movies like they were love itself," Sandra once said. "But I slowly realized he loved cinema more than any woman." As Nicholson's focus shifted entirely toward his art, Sandra grew lonelier within her own marriage. Minor arguments became unbridgeable distances. In 1966, Sandra packed her things and left with their daughter. The marriage had lasted only 4 years, but for Jack, it left the first and deepest scar. 2 years later, they divorced officially and he never married again. When asked why, Nicholson just grinned, "I tried it once. No one could stand me that long." Despite the separation, he remained close to his daughter Jennifer, who would later become a fashion designer. Whenever he attended her runway shows, he stayed in the background, quiet, proud, and smiling. As for Sandra, she has always spoken of him with rare grace. Jack is a complicated man, profound and untamed. I don't think he was ever meant to live a quiet life. And perhaps it was from that brief marriage that Jack Nicholson learned a truth. The greater the artist, the higher the price of love. After Sandra Knight, he never walked down the aisle again, but that didn't mean he lived alone. On the contrary, the years that followed were a series of passionate, chaotic love affairs, unfolding like the complex roles he played on screen. As fame exploded after Easy Rider and 5 Easy Pieces, Jack became the most desired man in Hollywood. The sunglasses, the mischievous grin, and the mix of confidence and recklessness made him a force of nature who shattered every old rule. From then on, his private life entered the realm of legend, where the lines between love, passion, and instinct no longer existed. After Sandra, Jack had a relationship with Michelle Phillips, a member of the iconic band The Mamas and the Papas. Michelle once said, "Jack is the kind of man who makes you want to love him and run from him at the same time." Their affair was brief, but enough to fuel tabloid fascination throughout the 1970s. Next came Winnie Hallman, a Danish model with a wild beauty. Their connection was primal, and together they had a daughter, Honey Hallman, born in 1982, the result of a short but deeply affecting relationship. Though their romance ended, Nicholson remained close to Honey, trying to be the kind of father he never had himself. Another complicated chapter came with actress Susan Anspach, whom Nicholson met early in his career. Their on-and-off relationship stretched over years and was long shadowed by paternity rumors. It wasn't until 1998 that Nicholson publicly acknowledged her son, Caleb Goddard, as his own, a late but deeply sincere gesture that revealed a tenderness rarely seen in him. Nicholson's romances played out like scenes from his films, brief, intense, and unforgettable. He loved women the way he acted, completely, impulsively, but never for long. Friends said Nicholson had the ability to make anyone in the room feel like they were the only person he was looking at. Perhaps that's why, despite dozens of affairs, few women ever spoke of him with bitterness, only with regret that they couldn't hold on to a soul that lived for freedom. And amid that whirlwind of passion, one woman stood apart, Angelica Houston. Their 17-year relationship would become not just a love story, but a battlefield between desire and pain, between art and instinct. The next dramatic chapter in the extraordinary life of Jack Nicholson. Among the countless women who passed through Jack Nicholson's life, Angelica Houston was the only one who made all of Hollywood agree. That was real love. They met in 1973 at an artist's party in Los Angeles. Angelica was just 22, and Jack was already entering his golden age after The Last Detail and Chinatown. The daughter of legendary director John Huston, Angelica possessed a rare blend of elegance and intellect, unlike any of the women who usually surrounded Jack. He was instantly drawn to her, and she, though fully aware of Nicholson's reputation as a womanizer, couldn't resist his pull. He walked into the room, Angelica later said, and everything else just disappeared. Their love began like a storm, passionate, magnetic, but never peaceful. For 17 years, they lived in a relationship full of contradictions, madly in love, breaking up and reuniting, unable to live together yet incapable of being apart. Hollywood dubbed them the most beautiful and dangerous couple, a classic-born film heiress and the wild rebel who embodied a new cinematic era. Angelica stood beside Jack through the brightest years of his career. One flew over the cuckoo's nest, the shining Batman. She was there at the Oscar parties, behind the scenes, always just behind him, silent, proud, devoted. But behind the glamour was a woman who felt increasingly alone in the shadow of a great man. Nicholson was never faithful. The tabloids constantly reported his affairs, models, actresses, artists. Each time he was caught, he apologized and did it again. "I knew he wasn't made to belong to anyone," Angelica once said, "but I loved him. Foolishly. Completely." By the late 1980s, it all fell apart when Nicholson fathered a child with model Rebecca Broussard. The news struck like a knife, ending a relationship that had lasted nearly 2 decades. Angelica recalled the moment she found out. "I went to his house, looked him straight in the eyes and asked, 'Is it true?' He nodded, and I hit him. So hard my hand went numb." The story of Angelica Punched Jack became a Hollywood legend. Not for its drama, but for what it symbolized. The heartbreak of a love built on imbalance. One who kept giving, and one who never knew how to keep. In a rare interview years later, Jack admitted, "I hurt her badly, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. She's an extraordinary woman, not just in my life, but in the life of any man lucky enough to know her." After the breakup, Angelica moved forward with her career, eventually winning an Oscar for Precy's Honor, directed by her father. Jack, though he continued his relationship with Rebecca Broussard and had children with her, never again found the same depth of connection he had with Angelica. With Broussard, he had 2 children, Lorraine Nicholson, born 1990, and Ray Nicholson, born 1992. Both followed in his artistic footsteps and remain closest to him today. Jack is often seen attending film events with Lorraine, while Ray occasionally acts, bearing his father's unmistakable eyes and grin. Nicholson is known to have at least 6 children in total, including Tessa Gorin, born in 1994, a daughter he has never publicly acknowledged. In a striking interview, Tessa said, "He never wanted to meet me. I'm not angry, just sad. But I think a man like him, maybe he's lived too many lives to have room left for one he didn't plan." Today, With the spotlight long faded, Jack Nicholson lives alone in his sprawling home on Mulholland Drive, surrounded by Picassos, Rodins, and Modiglianis, symbols of immortality he's always admired. Among the thousands of women who once passed through his life, in the end, he's left only with himself, quiet, solitary, and perhaps finally honest. The man who once made the world believe he could do anything, in the end, could never complete one role in his life, that of a lifelong partner. Throughout a career spanning more than half a century, Jack Nicholson became famous not only for his talent and his calculated madness in acting, but also for his volatile relationships behind the scenes, with directors, co-stars, and anyone brave enough to work with him. In Hollywood, he was admired, feared, and often labeled too difficult to handle. Yet that very quality helped build the legend of Jack Nicholson, an artist who never chose the easy road. His first major behind-the-scenes tension came with Marlon Brando, the man Nicholson once called the god of acting. When they starred together in The Missouri Breaks, 1976, Jack saw it as a chance to learn from his idol. But Brando, famously unpredictable and unwilling to follow any rules, turned the set into chaos. He refused to memorize lines, improvised entire scenes, and sometimes wouldn't even get out of his car. Nicholson, who prized precision and control, tolerated it at first, but gradually realized his idol had lost his fire. He was great, Jack later said, but he didn't want to be great anymore. Still, the respect never disappeared. After Brando's death, Nicholson bought his house, not to live in it, but to demolish it, simply to keep the view quiet. The gesture, often misread as cruel, perfectly reflected Nicholson's nature, a man who craved solitude, but only on his own terms. Another fiery collaboration came with Faye Dunaway during The Two Jakes, 1990, the long-awaited sequel to Chinatown, which Nicholson directed and starred in. Faye, known for her perfectionism, clashed constantly with him over creative direction. Both were too strong-willed to yield, and arguments erupted on set. The film ultimately failed at the box office, and Nicholson took it as a painful lesson. Even geniuses can't recreate magic twice. His relationship with Stanley Kubrick was a strange mix of admiration and psychological torment. During the making of The Shining, Kubrick forced Nicholson to perform some scenes hundreds of times, driving him to exhaustion. Jack smashed props, downed coffee non-stop, and pushed himself to the brink. Yet from that hellish process emerged one of cinema's greatest masterpieces. Nicholson would later admit, "Without Kubrick, I'd never have known how far I could go." With Tom Cruise, Nicholson became the archetypal mentor figure, a mountain the younger actor both revered and sought to conquer. In A Few Good Men, 1992, their courtroom confrontation, punctuated by Nicholson's thunderous line, "You can't handle the truth," became one of the most iconic moments in American film history. Cruise later said, "He wasn't acting, he was the truth." Nicholson, amused by Cruise's precision and discipline, once quipped, "He's so perfect it makes me a little tired." With Leonardo DiCaprio and Sean Penn, Nicholson maintained a dynamic balance between respect and challenge. On the set of The Departed, 2006, he frequently altered lines, added improvised gestures, and forced DiCaprio to react in real time. "He made every scene feel like it could collapse at any moment," DiCaprio recalled, "but that's exactly why it felt so alive." Nicholson's reply, "I want every scene to be on the verge of falling apart, because only then will the audience believe it's real." That was Jack Nicholson's philosophy, to live and act as if there were no second take. Whether working with legends or newcomers, he brought the same energy, chaotic, unpredictable, but vibrantly alive. And that's why he earned his title as Hollywood's most dangerous man. Not because he destroyed, but because he pushed everyone around him to their absolute limits. Like many of his on-screen characters, Jack Nicholson's real life has been a series of clashes, scandals, and unbelievable stories. Sometimes frightening, sometimes hilarious, but always unapologetically Jack. In 1994, he became the center of media frenzy over what would later be called the legendary golf club incident. One morning in Los Angeles, Nicholson was driving when another motorist, Donald Belden, suddenly cut him off. Already stressed over a film project, Nicholson snapped. He got out of his car, pulled a golf club from the trunk, and smashed it repeatedly against the other driver's windshield. The press went wild, the police got involved, and Hollywood's craziest man alive reputation was reinforced once again. Nicholson quickly settled out of court, reportedly paying $500,000 in damages, and issued a public apology. He later joked, "It was the worst Monday morning of my life, but at least I learned never to keep a golf club in the car." 2 years later, in 1996, he was back in court after a neighbor accused him of harassment and property damage during an angry outburst. The matter was resolved quietly with a small settlement and a personal apology. Still, the image of Nicholson as Hollywood's uncontrollable star had become part of his legend, a man both feared and adored by everyone in the business. Yet the most shocking episode of his life didn't come from one of his own outbursts, but from his house. In 1977, when director Roman Polanski was arrested for photographing and sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl, the incident took place at Nicholson's home on Mulholland Drive. Jack was in Colorado filming at the time and had no involvement whatsoever, but his name dominated headlines across the world, forever linked to one of Hollywood's darkest scandals. Nicholson later remarked calmly, "I wasn't there, but when you're famous, everything around you can get dragged into the storm." As the years passed, stranger stories began to swirl around him, until the line between truth and myth all but disappeared. One of the most infamous tales was his supposed 3-month naked therapy in the 1970s, meant to liberate his emotions and mind. Another claimed that after the 1969 Manson family murders of Sharon Tate, which occurred near his neighborhood, Nicholson slept with a hammer beside his bed for months, terrified that he might be next. Even outside of his personal life, Nicholson often stunned the public with his candor in politics. After visiting Cuba in 1998, he called Fidel Castro a genius, prompting outrage in the American press. But, true to form, Nicholson never retracted the statement. "I'm not perfect," he said in an interview, "but I'm always honest. And if you stay honest long enough, people start calling you crazy." For Jack Nicholson, crazy has never been an insult. It's simply the way he survives in a world that keeps pretending to be sane. Though famous as a rebel, Jack Nicholson has always possessed a surprisingly sharp financial mind, proof that behind the madness lies an exceptionally clear head. In his later years, his net worth is estimated at around $400 million, much of it earned through legendary film contracts and shrewd investments in art. From as early as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, Nicholson proved he was not just an actor, but a strategist in the entertainment industry. He negotiated a deal for $1 million plus 15% of the film's net profits, virtually unheard of at the time. The film became a massive success, grossing over $100 million worldwide, earning Nicholson the equivalent of about $60 million in today's money. Then came 1989 and Batman. Taking on the role of the Joker, Nicholson once again rewrote Hollywood's financial playbook. Instead of a flat salary, he struck a masterful deal, $6 million up front, plus a share of global profits, including merchandise sales, toys, and image rights. When the film became a cultural phenomenon, Nicholson reportedly made nearly $90 million, making him one of the highest-paid actors in cinema history. Beyond his acting income, Nicholson is also one of Hollywood's most enigmatic art collectors. Over decades, he quietly built an art collection valued at around $150 million, featuring works by Picasso, Matisse, Degas, Modigliani, Rodin, Magritte, and other 20th century masters. One art dealer once said, "If Jack weren't an actor, he'd be the greatest art curator in America." In real estate, Nicholson owns several luxurious yet discreet properties. The most famous is his Mulholland Drive mansion, often described as Jack Nicholson's private fortress. Over the years, he bought multiple houses around it to ensure total privacy, even purchasing and demolishing Marlon Brando's former home next door to preserve the view and the peace. He also owns a ranch in Malibu and a secluded retreat in Shasta County, where he spends most of his time since withdrawing from Hollywood. True to his personality, Nicholson's taste in possessions reflects individuality and legacy rather than extravagance. His classic car collection includes a Mercedes-Benz 600, Bentley Mulsanne, Range Rover, and other vintage European models, not as trophies, but as mementos of a golden era. Jack Nicholson once said, "The richest man is the one who still lives like an artist." And indeed, despite a fortune that would make any star envious, he has never chased luxury for its own sake. For Jack, true wealth isn't in diamonds or fine wine. It's in the freedom to live, to be wild, and to never have to explain himself to anyone. At nearly 90 years old, Jack Nicholson, the man who once ruled every screen, now exists only as a shadow of legend in a world that's changing too fast. After more than a decade away from Hollywood, he rarely appears in public, gives no interviews, and hasn't joined any new film projects. Yet even in seclusion, the name Jack Nicholson has never faded from the minds of audiences. And in 2025, people finally caught a glimpse of him again, if only for a moment. In February 2025, Nicholson caused a stir when he made a surprise appearance at the Saturday Night Live 50th anniversary special in New York, his first major public event in almost 2 years. With his snow-white hair, trademark sunglasses, and that same mischievous smile, Jack walked onto the stage to introduce his longtime friend, Adam Sandler. "Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Sandler." Just one line, and the crowd erupted. That brief moment felt like a flashback to an era when Jack was the heartbeat of Hollywood, a man whose mere presence could make an entire room stop breathing. A few weeks earlier, a rare photo had circulated online, Nicholson posing with his daughter Lorraine during the holidays. His face was older, his gaze slower and deeper, but he still carried that unmistakable aura, a mix of weariness and serenity. At 88, Jack now uses a cane to walk, but according to his close friend Danny DeVito, who visited him recently, Jack's doing fine, still funny as ever. He just likes the quiet now. He doesn't want to be seen so much anymore. These days, he lives a reclusive life in his Mulholland Drive mansion, once the center of legendary Hollywood parties. Friends say he keeps in touch with only a few people, spending his time reading, watching old films, and talking with his children, especially Ray and Lorraine, to whom he's closest. Occasionally, he steps out onto the balcony to gaze down at the Los Angeles Valley, the city that built the legend of Jack Nicholson, and the same city now slowly watching him fade into silence. Even off-screen, Nicholson's presence still permeates Hollywood. Younger stars like Leonardo DiCaprio, Joaquin Phoenix, and Christian Bale all cite him as a compass for fearless acting. Audiences, too, continue to revisit The Shining, Cuckoo's Nest, and A Few Good Men, not just as films, but as lessons in humanity, madness, and freedom. Now that Nicholson has nearly vanished from the world he once ruled, his legacy lies not in the title of legend, but in the way he forever redefined what it means to act. He wasn't merely a symbol of an era. He changed the image of the American man on screen. Imperfect, flawed, torn, and rawly human. He brought madness, vulnerability, and instinct into cinema, paving the way for generations, from De Niro and Pacino to DiCaprio, to live their characters rather than simply play them. To directors, Jack was both a dream and a nightmare. He could force a scene to be shot dozens of times, but the result was always something no one dared erase. Stanley Kubrick, Martin Scorsese, Mike Nichols, James L. Brooks all admitted the same. Only Nicholson could turn chaos into art. In popular culture, he remains the face of intelligent rebellion, from the Joker's grin to McMurphy's eyes to the scream in The Shining. Those images have transcended cinema itself, becoming the language of emotion. No actor since has been able to replicate that perfect blend of madness and humanity that was uniquely Jack. Even in his absence, his shadow still looms over Hollywood, from the way a young actor sits in an audition room to how a director frames a close-up to capture a character's gaze. Jack Nicholson didn't just leave behind unforgettable performances. He left behind a measure of devotion, a reminder that cinema can still be a place where people live truthfully, if only for a few minutes before the camera. Nicholson once said, "Acting isn't a job, it's a way of being." Perhaps that's why, even now, long after he's stepped away, we can't help but ask, without Jack, what would Hollywood lose? He didn't depart with a statement or a farewell tour, only with silence, the kind only those who've mastered the spotlight can afford. And perhaps somewhere in that house on Mulholland Drive, Jack still looks out over Los Angeles, smiling at the chaos he once helped create. The story of Jack Nicholson doesn't end in old age. It merely pauses, like a film that audiences aren't ready to leave just yet. And what about you? Do you still remember the first time you saw that wild, unforgettable grin on screen? Share your memories of Jack Nicholson below, and don't forget to subscribe as we continue uncovering the untold journeys of Hollywood legends who never truly fade.